Leng Lui is for Pretty Lady by Elaine Chu of Malaysia. Everyone says I'm lucky. Lucky because Mrs. Kong likes to give me her old clothing, dresses she hadn't worn since the 1980s, and her old underwear. Most of them don't really fit me. The bras have strings trailing from the torn lace, and the dresses are too formal for scrubbing the kitchen floor or clambering up on the top of counters and cleaning shelves. So, with the dresses, I sometimes cut them up to use as dishcloth, since Mrs. Kong thinks store-bought dish wipes are an unnecessary household expense. Or I give the dresses to my friends when I see them in central Hong Kong on Sunday. Maridel, with arms sectioned like pink lotus roots and hips like the soft underside of a pear, says to me, "I don't want your frumpy housecoats, Alina, freebie or no. You're lucky I offer them to you," I say. She shrugs and pulls up these cords she's sewn with finesse onto her fake suede shoes to make them look like boots. "Those boots make you look like a hoe," I say. She smirks. "Ain't it look like Pretty Woman, though?" She knows I'm a big fan of that movie. No, I can't say I'm as lucky as everyone seems to think, at least not compared to Maridel. Her Tai doesn't get up till 2 in the afternoon, being a nightclub singer, and only comes home in the wee hours, so Maridel can protest all she likes, but we all know she goes to bed at 10. So I've said before to Luya and Phoebe, our luck is entirely determined by the kind of job or mood your Tai holds. If she has a bad day, you have a bad day too. Luya, with her palm olive glossy hair, likes to disagree. She has opinions on everything. She says that if you're better educated than the other 140,000 amas here, your employer inevitably sees your worth and will treat you better. As if she's a Chinese antique. Stare hard enough, maybe you can see the value of a moldy, cracking piece of wood. She says it may even be the staircase to a better job, maybe as a restaurant hostess or an office assistant. She's mental, having this kind of Bahala Na attitude about everything. Me, I've got myself an English literature degree from University in Manila, and look where it has got me. What's the difference between me and Phoebe, who can barely speak English? We both get up at 6 in the morning to get the children to school. We cook and clean all day, and then we have to hear the harping from our Tai-Tais. "Aiya, why you no clean behind door stump? Look here, balls of dust big as udon." Fish balls. I've learned a lot of spoken Cantonese, that chicken scrawly writing in the newspapers that makes life in the city one giant mystery. Or, "You big stupid egg, you boil chicken until you can poke at flesh, and it spring back." I have to bite back reply, "No, Mrs. Kong, chicken dead, you can poke but it no spring back." Mrs. Kong looks at me suspiciously, so I know she knows I have a good education and speak better English than she does. Luya's dead wrong on this one. If you are better educated, your Tai thinks you're acting superior, and she's waiting to pounce on your mistakes and make sure you know your place. Stacking my pillow against my arm at night, I don't think about what Luya told me, that she's heard about Jose out with some girl, or Abuela kneeling for me daily at Santa Ana, or 3-year-old Juanito looking at pictures I send home and saying, "Mama?" No, I think about how to survive every day with Mrs. Kong. Phoebe likes to call me Leng Lui, a Cantonese slang for pretty lady she picked up from the street vendors in Mongkok. But I'm not cheap like Charina or Fredalia, who cruise for gringos with white skin like sharks at tom-tom clubs in Wan Chai. Charina and Fredalia are no better than prostitutes, I tell Maridel. "They got style," she says, "learning how to smoke cigarettes and doing the hip-hop. Who cares if they can swing their hips and smile their secret smiles in the hopes of piggybacking one of those sharks who will whisk them away to America or London? Would you sell your soul just so you can have a chintz drawing room, or fake oriental vases, or stainless steel hobs, or a game room with dead stuffed animals hanging on the walls?" No, I stick to my movies. Ling Ling and Sveeder share a DVD player, and after Thomas the Tank Engine, I sneak in a few minutes of Pretty Woman or An Officer and a Gentleman. All these romances that Mrs. Kong buys and watches with subtitles of chicken scrawly writing, slumped in the living room with curtains drawn, chain smoking, and wearing her owlish tortoiseshell frames, crying into her oolong. Each movie takes me a long time to finish because I get only 10 minutes a day, but it makes the expecting doubly sweet. Lots of time in between washing dishes and peeling onions to daydream about myself in the movies. Phoebe often says I got the face. Sometimes I can even see myself speaking lines in front of a camera. It's not that far-fetched, I say to Luya and Maridel, who hoot with scorn. But what's the harm of daydreaming in the boring routine we face every day? It's like those edges that hold a jigsaw puzzle together on the pages within a book cover. I watch these romances, and I dare to dream that when I return to Manila, Jose will come greet me at the train station, daisies in his hand and our daughter beside him. Is that so far-fetched? My lot could be worse. It could be like Eliza Eunice, who got spanked in the head with a frying pan because her employer thought she'd stolen $32 from an ashtray. Eliza Eunice, who died in the hospital a week later from a blood clot in her brain caused by a concussion. Even if her employer rots in jail, who do you think is a loser? Lucky for me, Mrs. Kong isn't really too much into using an apparatus to give one a whipping. She likes the knuckle maneuver, a sharp and hard rap to the side of the head. Mr. Kong hardly seems to notice I'm around. But what we fear most is losing our jobs. We have 2 weeks to find a new job before getting deported. As Maridel tells me, it was explained to her by this Australian she was seeing, a conundrum? If we get fired, we can't get a new job unless we have a discharge letter from our old employer. And call me dumb, but unless you have an employer who has a conscience where amas are concerned, or who is just plain nice, you'd be a fool to think you can get that discharge letter. Now that's a real conundrum. The Kongs are a bit funny. The kids are normal enough. Sveeder likes to chew on cotton buds. Ling Ling operates on her dolls with scissors. Mrs. Kong drinks White Russians in the afternoon and insists it's only milk. Sometimes she has her cronies over for mahjong, and amidst the clack-clack of those short titles, I can hear her complaining tones to those bejeweled ladies in faux fur, as if life has kidnapped her and demanded a ransom. Mr. Kong is a branch manager for HSBC. Sometimes he works late, though I don't know why, since the branch closes by 5. When I first came to work for the Kongs, I was impressed by what a dapper little man Mr. Kong was. Clean-shaven, suit neatly pressed, shoes shine to a dull gleam, and he washes his hands 10 or 11 times a day. Until one day when I glimpsed him cutting his toenails and emptying the clippings into a plant sitting on their bedroom windowsill. When next I went to water it, I lifted the fronds, and there at the base was a mountain of toenail and fingernail clippings. Lately, he has taken to putting a turnip next to his bedside lamp. I found it one morning and puzzled, replaced it in the refrigerator. Later that evening, Mr. Kong strides into the kitchen, which he never comes into, opens the refrigerator, takes out the turnip and walks away with it, but not before I see the expression in his eye, furtive and creepy. Before bedtime, I espy him speaking to it, sitting on the bed in his neatly ironed pajamas with his feet firmly flat on the mat. His words are unintelligible, but his chest puffs out and his shoulders straighten. Perhaps he pours his heart out to the turnip, since he and Mrs. Kong don't speak much beyond tidbits about the children. When I tell Maridel, she laughs like a wild woman. What, he talks to a turnip? Why a turnip? Mrs. Kong hardly notices, or maybe she simply doesn't care. She's flirting with the young man who tends the Chinese medicinal shop down on Sai Yao Choi. He shows her dried deer antlers, and they both giggle with hands over their mouths. Taking out a brown oblong piece that looks like a finger, he whispers something in her ear. Mrs. Kong flutters her eyes and turns dragon fruit red. He turns to me suddenly and says in English loudly, "Penis, this penis." I feel pity for Mr. Kong because he works hard and tries to be a good father, but Sveeder only gurgles at him with a slack jaw. Again, I wonder if the boy has brain damage, because only an idiot has a crooked mouth like that. Ling Ling ignores him completely, intent on her toy musical instruments, her dolls, or her drawing pads. But soon things heat up. Hot as you can boil an egg on the pavement, and Mrs. Kong gets all dolled up. She tells me she's going to the medicinal shop to get some soup ingredients. I can go, madam. She waves her hand dismissively, slings her purse over her shoulder, stops to check her lipstick in the hallway mirror. 1 hour later, she's still not back. The nursery calls about Sveeder. Then the school calls about Ling Ling. I tell them she's coming. I put the chicken where I've been pulling out small white quills from the pink skin into the water-filled sink. I'm uneasy, but maybe they're just chatting. Who does hanky-panky in the daylight? When I get to the shop, the iron grill door is padlocked. No one in sight. The shop is brown and murky, still as a crocodile slumbering in hot, swampy waters. The ceiling fan has been left on, whirling silently like helicopter blades. On the pavement, I squat and wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20. No sign of Mrs. Kong. Maybe she isn't here after all. Maybe she came and has gone out to the park and shop opposite. I fan myself with an old newspaper, thinking about Sveeder, probably sniveling scared, and Ling Ling, who hates being the last to leave school. Angry, I jump up and, through the grilled iron bars, I shout, "Mrs. Kong! Mrs. Kong!" She emerges half-dressed, hair askew, her lipstick smeared. "It's you," she says accusingly. I'm not the one with my petticoat down my legs. "What you doing here, huh, Alina?" she demands, pulling her dress over her camisole, in her haste, slotting buttons into the wrong eye hooks. The young man is behind her, cigarette dangling, wearing tight briefs and a white singlet, damp in patches. "I'm sorry, madam," I say, "but Sveeder and Ling Ling—" Mrs. Kong cuts me off, saying something in rapid Cantonese to the young man. He comes forward and unchains the padlock, smirking, his eyes tiny slits against the sun. Mrs. Kong comes outside and grabs my arm. Let's go, you stupid egg." She marches down the street, half-hauling me as if I've done something wrong. "You don't say nothing about this to anyone, you hear me? Or I fire you." But Mr. Kong must have sensed something's different. Maybe he too sees Mrs. Kong's smiles in the mirror, her fuller lips, her swaying hips. Suddenly, she seems as bouffant as her hair. The next evening, Mr. Kong is again with his turnip. At first, it seems he's whispering to it. Then, looking closer, I see him kiss it. Not just kiss, but his tongue flicks in and out. "Sir?" He drops the turnip like a hot chicken bun. "Your tea, sir?" Not right now." He picks up his turnip, looks at it, melancholy-like, but his tone is gruff. "Where's Mrs. Kong?" "She's at Mrs. Chin's for mahjong." Yes, I forgot. The kids?" "Asleep, sir." "Good. Bring my tea, Alina. I'm tired now." When I tell my Sunday group about Mr. Kong's tonguing of the turnip, they split their sides. "Really?" Phoebe asks, eyes wide and mouth open. Maridel says, "He probably need those deer antlers. Maybe then he don't need to practice on a turnip." Leah shakes her head. "I'm glad I don't work for a Chinese tai-tai. They're cruel and weird." To the fact that if I tell anyone, Mrs. Kong would fire me, Maridel says, "That's no threat. Spill the beans and I fire you," she mocks in her best Cantonese accent, surprisingly sounding just like Mrs. Kong. "Peel potatoes wrong and I fire you. Sweep room bad and I fire you." "Yeah, what you know about that," I say. "Your tai-tai only sweeps once a year." Luya pats me on the shoulder. "Ate, nothing bad happened to you now. You lucky, because you know there's secrets." The afternoon visits to the medicinal shop and Mr. Kong's turnip abuse continue. I finish more romances, one movie per sitting. Pretty Woman, a few more times. Out in the living room, too, with curtains drawn, sometimes drinking White Russians. One evening, while changing the water in the vases, I ad-lib the lines to Pretty Woman in the hallway mirror, the part where she talks about being a princess trapped in a tower. Suddenly, in the mirror, I see Mr. Kong watching me. But he doesn't watch me like the gringos do in Central, openly, lewdly. Mr. Kong watches me with one scary eye in between the hinges of the door of the kitchen. Then, one afternoon, as I come in from mopping the outside terrace, Mrs. Kong is standing in the lobby with a packed valise. "Madam," I ask. "Call Mr. Kong in office to pick up Chillin, Alina. Cook them omelets for dinner. I don't want Ling Ling stay up too late. If Chillin cry, tell them I call them from Phuket." "Phuket, madam?" "Yes. I go vacation. I be back next week." "But does Mr. Kong know where you're going, madam?" "No, but he no care anyway." She laughs bitterly, and then I'm alone with the Chillin. I've never called Mr. Kong at the office before. Trembling, I say.